The Takasebune. By Mori Ogai. The Takasebune were small boats that traveled up and down the Takas River in Kyoto. During the Tokugawa period, when a criminal in Kyoto was sentenced to exile on a distant island, their relatives were summoned to the prison to bid them farewell. The convict was then placed on a Takasebune and transported to Osaka. Escorting them was a D-shin, constable, a subordinate of the Kyoto magistrate. It was customary for this D-shin to allow one of the convict's relatives to accompany them on the journey to Osaka. This wasn't an officially sanctioned practice, but rather a tacitly permitted one, a matter of turning a blind eye. While the convicts sentenced to exile had undoubtedly committed serious offenses, they weren't necessarily all hardened criminals guilty of theft, murder, or arson. More than half of those on the Takasebune were individuals who had committed unintentional crimes due to lapses in judgment. A common example would be a man who had attempted a double suicide, what was then called itashi, killing the woman involved but surviving himself. Carrying such convicts, the Takasebune would set off around the time of the evening bell, passing the darkened houses of Kyoto on both banks as it flowed eastward, crossing the Kamo River on its way downriver. Throughout the night, the convict and their relative would share their stories. These were often repetitive tales of regret, with no hope of changing the past. The escorting D-shin, listening in, would gain intimate knowledge of the convict's family and their tragic circumstances. This was a world far removed from the formal testimonies heard in the magistrate's courtroom or the written confessions read at the official's desk. D-shin varied in temperament. Some were indifferent, finding the conversations tiresome and wanting to block them out. Others were deeply empathetic, silently absorbing the sorrow of the human condition, though their professional role prevented them from showing it. Occasionally, when a particularly sensitive and tearful D-shin was assigned to escort a convict and their relative in dire straits, they couldn't help but shed tears. For this reason, escort duty on the Takasebune was an unpopular assignment among the constables of the magistrate's office. It was sometime during the Kansi era, likely when Lord Shirakawa Rakuo held political power in Edo. On a spring evening, as the cherry blossoms of Kyonin Temple scattered with the evening bell, an unusual convict, unlike any seen before, was placed on a Takasebune. His name was Kisuke, a man of about 30 with no fixed address. Naturally, he had no relatives to be summoned to the prison, so he boarded the boat alone. The D-shin assigned to escort him, Haneda Shipei, knew only that Kisuke was guilty of fratricide. As he escorted the thin, pale Kisuke from the prison to the pier, Shipei observed the convict's demeanor. Kisuke was remarkably composed and docile, showing respect for Shipei's authority and offering no resistance. This wasn't the feigned obedience often seen among criminals trying to curry favor. Shipei found this puzzling. Even after they boarded the boat, he didn't just keep a superficial watch but paid close attention to Kisuke's every move. The wind had died down that evening, and thin clouds veiled the moon. The approaching warmth of summer seemed to rise as mist from the riverbanks and the riverbed. After leaving the lower Kyoto district and crossing the Kamo River, all was quiet except for the sound of water lapping against the bow of the boat. Although convicts were permitted to lie down and sleep during the night journey, Kisuke remained seated, gazing at the moon as its brightness waxed and waned behind the shifting clouds. His brow was serene, and his eyes held a gentle light. Shipei avoided staring directly, but he never took his eyes off Kisuke's face. Strange, strange, he kept repeating to himself. Kisuke's expression, from every angle, seemed remarkably cheerful. If it weren't for the presence of an officer, Shipei thought he might start whistling or humming a tune. Shipei pondered this. He had escorted countless convicts on the Takasebune, and they had almost always worn expressions of utter despair. What was different about this man? He looked like he was on a pleasure cruise. He was guilty of killing his brother. Even if his brother had been a bad person, and even if there were extenuating circumstances, he should still be feeling some remorse. Could this pale, thin man be so devoid of human emotion, such a rare villain? Shipei didn't think so. Perhaps he was mad. No, there was nothing incoherent about his words or behavior. The more Shipei thought about it, the more perplexing Kisuke's attitude became. After a while, Shipei couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. Kisuke, he called out, what are you thinking about? Yes, sir, Kisuke replied, looking around as if he had been caught doing something wrong. He straightened his posture and looked at Shpei expectantly. Shpei felt the need to explain his sudden question and justify his departure from official protocol. "It's nothing official," he said. "I've been curious about how you feel about going to the island. I've sent many people there on this boat, all sorts of people, and every one of them was heartbroken. They cried all night with the relatives who came to see them off. But you don't seem bothered at all. What are your thoughts?" Kisuke smiled faintly. "Thank you for your kind concern. I understand that going to the island is a sad thing for most people. I can imagine how they must feel. But that's because they've known comfort in the world. Kyoto is a fine place, but even in a fine place like Kyoto, I don't think anyone has suffered as I have. The authorities have graciously spared my life and are sending me to the island. It might be a harsh place, but I'm sure it's not hell. I've never had a place to truly call home. Now the authorities are telling me to go to the island and stay there. To be able to settle down somewhere is a blessing. I may be frail, but I've never been sick a day in my life, so I believe I can handle any hard labor on the island without injury. And for being sent to the island, I received 200 Monday." He paused and touched his chest. It was customary at the time to give 200 copper mon to those sentenced to exile. Kisuke continued, "I'm ashamed to admit it, but I've never had 200 mon in my possession before. I've always wandered around looking for work, and whenever I found it, I worked as hard as I could. But the money I earned always went straight to others. If I could buy food with the money I earned, that was a good day. Usually, I was just paying back debts and taking on new ones. But since being in prison, I've been fed without having to work. I feel indebted to the authorities for this. And when I left the prison, I was given these 200 Monday. Since I'm still being fed by the authorities, I can keep this money. This is the first time I've had any savings. I don't know what kind of work I can find on the island, but I'm looking forward to using these 200 mon as seed money." He fell silent. Shpei responded, "Is that so?" He was so taken aback by Kisuke's words that he couldn't speak for a while, lost in thought. Shpei was nearing 60, with a wife, 4 children, and an elderly mother, making a household of 7. He lived frugally, almost to the point of being considered miserly, owning little clothing beyond his official uniform and sleeping garments. Unfortunately, his wife came from a wealthy merchant family. Although she was well-intentioned and tried to manage their household on his meager salary, she was accustomed to a more comfortable lifestyle and struggled to make ends meet. Towards the end of each month, they often found themselves short of funds. His wife would secretly borrow money from her family to balance the books, knowing her husband's aversion to debt. Of course, Shpei was aware of this, and he felt ashamed to accept even gifts from his in-laws during festivals or new clothes for his children on special occasions. These financial struggles were the occasional source of friction in the otherwise peaceful Haneda household. Listening to Kisuke, Shpei compared the convict's situation to his own. Kisuke's earnings always slipped through his fingers. It was a pitiful state of affairs. But when Shpei considered his own life, he wondered how much better off he really was. He, too, was just passing along his government stipend to others. The difference between them was merely one of scale. Shpei didn't even have savings equivalent to Kisuke's treasured 200 Monday. Considering the difference in scale, it made sense that Kisuke saw those 200 mon as savings and rejoiced in them. Shpei could understand that feeling. But what truly baffled him, regardless of the scale, was Kisuke's lack of desire, his contentment. Kisuke struggled to find work, but once he did, he was satisfied with earning just enough to survive. And now, in prison, he was amazed to be fed without working, experiencing a level of contentment he'd never known before. Shpei realized, despite the difference in scale, there was a vast chasm between them. His own life, while occasionally tight, was generally balanced. He lived hand-to-mouth, but he rarely felt truly content. Beneath the surface, a constant anxiety gnawed at him. What would happen if he lost his job? What if he fell ill? Even with his small savings, he wished he had more. Where did this endless cycle of wanting end? And here was Kisuke, demonstrating the point at which one could simply stop. Shpei looked at Kisuke with newfound awe. As Kisuke gazed at the sky, Shpei imagined a halo around his head. Still watching Kisuke, Shpei called out again, "Kisuke-san." He added the honorific san without fully realizing it. As soon as the words left his mouth, He realized his impropriety, but it was too late to take them back. Yes, Kisuke replied, seemingly puzzled by the honorific. He cautiously looked at Shpei, feeling a bit awkward, said, "Forgive me for all the questions, but I heard you're being sent to the island for killing someone. Could you tell me about it?" Kisuke, looking deeply apologetic, said, "Certainly," and began to speak softly. "It was a terrible misunderstanding, a horrible thing I did. Looking back, I can't believe I did it. I was completely out of my mind. My parents died of a plague when I was young, leaving just my younger brother and me. At first, the neighbors took pity on us, like orphaned puppies, and gave us errands to run so we wouldn't starve. As we grew older and looked for work, we tried to stay together, supporting each other. It happened last autumn. My brother and I were working at a weaving mill in Nishigen, operating the draw looms. My brother fell ill and couldn't work. We were living in a shack in Katayama, crossing the Kamaya River Bridge to get to the mill. Every evening when I returned with food, my brother would apologize for being a burden, for letting me work alone. One day, I came home as usual and found him lying face down on the futon, covered in blood. I was shocked. I dropped my lunch bag and rushed to his side, asking, "What happened? What happened?" He looked up at me, his face pale, blood staining his cheeks and chin, but he couldn't speak. All I could hear was a wheezing sound with each breath. I couldn't understand what had happened. "What's wrong? Did you cough up blood?" I asked, trying to get closer. He pushed himself up slightly with his right hand, his left hand clamped tightly under his chin, black clots of blood oozing between his fingers. He spoke, finally able to make sounds. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I'm so sick, I don't think I'll recover. I wanted to die quickly and ease your burden. I thought if I cut my throat, I would die instantly, but the air just leaks out, and I can't die. I tried to cut deep, I pushed hard, but the razor slipped sideways. I don't think the blade is chipped. If you could just pull it out, I think I can die. Talking hurts. Please, help me pull it out." When he loosened his left hand, the air wheezed out again. I couldn't speak, I was speechless. I looked at the wound on his throat. It seemed he'd tried to cut across his throat with a razor in his right hand, but failing that, he'd plunged it deep, as if trying to gouge it out. Only about 2 inches of the handle were sticking out. I just stared at him, not knowing what to do. In moments like that, it's strange how eyes can speak. His eyes pleaded with me, "Hurry, hurry," full of resentment. The resentment in his eyes grew stronger, turning into a hateful glare, like he was looking at an enemy. Seeing that, I knew I had to do what he asked. "All right," I said, "I'll pull it out." The look in his eyes changed instantly. They became clear and bright, almost joyful. I thought I had to do it quickly, so I dropped to my knees and leaned forward. He let go of his right hand and propped himself up on his left elbow, turning sideways. I gripped the razor handle firmly and pulled. Just then, an old woman, a neighbor I'd asked to check on him while I was away, opened the front door and came in. It was getting dark inside, so I don't know how much she saw. She gasped and ran out, leaving the door open. When I pulled the razor out, I tried to do it quickly and cleanly, but the sensation in my hand felt like I was cutting through something that hadn't been cut before. The blade was angled outwards, so I must have cut outwards. I just sat there, razor in hand, watching in a daze as the old woman came in and ran out. When she was gone, I looked at my brother. He wasn't breathing anymore. Blood was gushing from the wound. From then until the elders came and took me to the authorities, I just sat there, holding the razor, staring at my dead brother's half-open eyes. Kisuke, who had been looking up at Shpei's face as he spoke, now lowered his gaze to his lap. His story was coherent, almost too coherent. This was the result of replaying the events countless times over the past 6 months, refining his account with each interrogation by the authorities, and the magistrate Shpei had listened, visualizing the scene as if he were there. But he couldn't shake the doubt that lingered. Was this truly fratricide? Was it murder? His brother had asked him to pull out the razor so he could die. Kisuke had done as he asked, and his brother had died. That was considered killing, murder. But if his brother was dying anyway, and he had wanted to die to escape his suffering, and Kisuke had ended his life to relieve that suffering, Was it a crime? It was undoubtedly a killing, but the motive, the desire to alleviate suffering, created a doubt that Spey couldn't resolve. After much deliberation, Spey concluded that he could only defer to the judgment of his superiors. He would accept the magistrate's decision as his own. Even so, something still bothered him. He wanted to ask the magistrate about it himself. As the hazy night deepened, the Takasebune glided silently over the dark water, carrying its 2 passengers.